Ecofictologists, my name is Lovis, and today I am welcoming a very special guest to the channel, a very good friend of mine. This is Sally Snow. Hi, Sally.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Sally is a zoologist and a filmmaker who uses her skills with film and photography for science communication, and she's got a passion for conservation filmmaking and delivering stories that connect both people and the environment. And yes, I did lift that completely off of the Lamave website. She's worked with the BBC and National Geographic, as well as many other well-known organizations. But we actually met in the Philippines when my partner and I were there working on whale shark research project with the Large Marine Vertebrates Research Institute Philippines, or for short, Lamave. And Sally is one of the executive directors, correct? That's your
Yes, I am now. I'm getting old.
Yeah. Well, she was in charge of so many things, but what I remember most is that she's always there with her camera, taking beautiful photos and footage of wildlife and people who work with it, live with it, need it. So she was kind of in charge of marketing and media. And you've had quite a lot of success with all of your filmmaking, getting awards and recognition all over the place. Last year you received the Rising Star Award from Jackson Wild. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that was really amazing. If for those of you that don't know Jackson Wild, it's an amazing film festival that specializes in impact. So they're really keen about the environment and also what filmmaking can do to actually impact in terms of conservation, environmental issues. And yeah, I was super honored to receive the award. It was a new award, and it was about just getting different voices, really, because I think with a lot of things, sometimes we see people who've been in the game for a really long time, and obviously they're amazing and they have such a great perspective. But this award was also to try and bring younger voices or newer voices. So that was really amazing.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Lamave and the kind of work that Lamave does in the Philippines?
Yeah, so basically, as Lovis mentioned, she was with us for our whale shark project. So Lamave, actually, we specialize in marine megafauna, and we look at the animal itself, but we also work alongside communities and government. So it's a lot about finding out the ecology or behavioural critical habitats for these animals, and then also some of the threats they face. So some of our projects at the moment is a rapid bycatch assessment, for example, to understand bycatch as a threat for turtles and sharks and rays. But also we look at tourism, because obviously it's an amazing place for us to connect with animals, but if it's done in an irresponsible way, it can actually be really damaging. And a lot of my work within that then is communicating the research. So that could be like showing what's going on visually with photographs, but we also use film as a way of kind of connecting communities and governments. So I found that it works really well of bringing people together to work on something, which maybe when it's something like a policy, which is not as exciting that everyone wants to do every day, but when you kind of put it into a film that is meant to be informative as well, it can actually be a really amazing platform to amplify that work.
What do you think it is about storytelling through conservation filmmaking that could inspire kind of behavioural change?
I think for me personally, I think there's two levels. So the one is actually the participation of the people in the film. So it depends what audience you're going for, right? So for example, we did a film recently that was actually a briefing film about the do's and don'ts of swimming with turtles. So this is something that maybe is quite educational, but we realize there's two different audiences, because obviously there's the people on the ground that actually are responsible for these guidelines. So the tour guides that take people out, and they're responsible for upholding them, but also the tourists, right? The tourists is the main audience because they need to know the guidelines, they need to understand the impact of breaking those guidelines. So one of the things we found worked really well was the participation of a lot of community members in the film, which was really fun because, I think that was a really amazing way of actually hearing from them some of the challenges they face in communicating to tourists. So some of the things that maybe the do's and don'ts actually expanded a bit, because they pointed out some really relevant things that I had no idea about, because obviously I wasn't, taking people out as a guide every day. But we also used a local story to try and connect people to the people of the island, because it's one thing saying, please don't do this because you might, displace the turtle from this amazing habitat, but also please don't do this because if the turtle disappears, tomorrow, the island will lose a livelihood. So to make that kind of emotional connection, not just to the animal, but the people, we kind of told the journey of the people going to the island. And then with the turtle, we kind of tried to get a bit more emotion about that, about telling the journey of the turtle's life, in the fact that, you know, as a young turtle, they leave these nesting beaches from a different place. They spent years at sea. They have to fight all these perils, whether that's a fishing net or predator. And the perils, and then the fact that they get to this beautiful island and they just need to rest in the corals. You know, they need to get a good meal eating the algae, or for the hawksbills, you know, getting the sponges. So we tried to portray to people, you know, that they haven't just like been here the whole time. They've really actually had to slog it to get here. So it's important we don't stop them for the next stage of their journey.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from those films?
Yeah, so it's amazing. So the island is actually a protected area, so it's governed by the government. So the film needed to be done in collaboration with the governing board, as well as the local community. So I think working with both sides was great, because you kind of got buy-in for the same regulations. And we actually, from the feedback from the community and from the information from the research, with the governing body, we helped improve the regulations of the island, so the actual law, the policy for the guidelines, which was a really great success for us, because it kind of fast tracks, you know, what the research is showing. But we also show, so we do trainings in other sites in the Philippines that have a similar tourism setup with turtles. And, you know, when we've shown them these types of videos, if they're starting out a tourism initiative or want some ideas, and for me personally, I think that's where we get like it's one of the best feedbacks, because they get really excited seeing somebody like themselves on screen, which is one of the problems I think we have kind of globally, especially because a lot of films we see are made by the West. It means that I don't think globally we have a decent representation, right? And the storytelling of all these different people around the world. You know, I worked in the UK for a long time in production, and often we're telling stories about these faraway places, but it's not necessarily through the eyes of the local person or the person that knows, you know, that area so well. So just seeing, you know, representation of yourself, you know, you see that everyone's like, yes, they're like, yes, that's the guide that I want to be. And, you know, I get so excited by that, because it's just like, I just love working with people. So it's really rewarding.
Do you think there's space for fiction to tell those stories as well, to represent the true stories, but in kind of a different context, maybe to access a different audience?
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking about this because, you know, I think fiction can take us on such wonderful journeys. And the thing you have to be careful of is that boundary of making something, you know, the element of truth, whether what you're talking, say you're talking about conservation issue, it's important that that is factually correct. But then the story around it obviously could not be, right? So I think, because sometimes I think there's a relationship where people are like, well, that wasn't 100% true, or they end up thinking that might be 100% true when there's an add-on, maybe, right?
I guess that's one of the issues, isn't it? Or not issues, but difficulties. If you're going to take a topic like conservation or climate change or habitat destruction, and you want to get across the facts and the science, and also how serious the situation is, but you don't want it to be a complete downer.
Yeah.
You want, I think the difficulty is finding an ending for those stories that is positive, but doesn't make it seem like, oh, it can be easily solved.
I was just going to say, the other thing as well would be to kind of focus on a smaller part of the story. So maybe following, I don't know, some climate activist and the ups and downs of that, but maybe a positive narrative, so that by the end there is a positive step forward. But maybe it's not the end of climate change, but maybe it's, I don't know, the commitments of governments to finally cut the source of fossil fuels, or whatever it is. I think, but something tangible like that, I think would make people go like, oh, actually, yeah, now I think maybe I'll go out and vote, because I do want to put a stop to fossil fuels. Because I think it's really important that we can actually identify with, you know, such complex and anxiety issues, right? I mean, it's not easy thinking about all these things. As a conservationist, I mean, I definitely feel the ups and downs of being like, oh my God, okay, we're moving forward. And then it's like despair. And I think it's all about trying to, you know, make sure that you get those positive things in your life. And they are there. And there are tangible things that each of us can do. But knowing that, and I think being motivated by a story to actually, you know, embody that is crucial.
But have you noticed that people respond better to the stories about hope and success stories and progress and conservation rather than the stories that are talking just about the destruction and kind of what we're losing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a huge believer in kind of like solution driven storytelling and like positive outcomes. And also you'll see this within kind of like the filmmaking industry, right? Films that only focus on the despair don't do very well, because ultimately a lot of people just don't want to see that and they'll want to turn off. So especially for like broadcast channels, they're not going to commission those types of films because they know that the audience doesn't really want that. It is, however, very important to express some of those bad things and kind of highlight the seriousness and the urgency of things. But I think there always needs to be a silver lining. And, you know, one of the things that, especially when you make films now, I think it's really important that you have a call to action for people, because there needs to be something that people can do.
You've received funding from the Conservation Media Group, which describes themselves as encouraging filmmakers for call to action campaigns, correct?
Yeah, so they're awesome, CMG. And they specialize, so their specialist is like impact media. So they want media that has an impact. So actually the briefing video that we did on Apple Island, that was actually funded by them. And they've really helped me grow, actually, because they ask those questions about like, you know, what is your call to action? Like, really, who is the audience? How are we going to know that this film actually made a difference? So you need some kind of indicators or metrics. So with the Apple Island film, for example, because we are a research institute, we've actually done compliance surveys and seen how tourists behave to the guidelines when there was no briefing video in place. And then we're hoping after COVID that we'll be able to do that and actually look at the difference. But also things like, another indicator for us was actually improving policy with the governing board. And that came about through the production of the video and the inclusion of people. So there's different types of things. But I think the thing that's really amazing about it, and this goes for anybody who's maybe trying to do, even if it's a multimedia piece, if you want to make a difference and have somebody do something, you need to be very specific about what it is. Mm-hmm. So with us, it was like, follow the guidelines, like do not abuse these guidelines that are there to protect the turtle. But you need that. And then you need to kind of be able to show that it's actually made an impact, which is something that more and more films are actually starting to do now. They're rolling out an impact campaign, especially these big documentaries. So a really amazing documentary that came out last year was Sea of Shadows, which was about the vaquita. So this is the rarest cetacean in the world. There's almost none left. They're found in Mexico. And the documentary tells the story of this animal, but from the perspectives of many different people, from scientists, from fishing communities, from investigative journalists in the country. And also it kind of goes into corruption and drug industry and all kinds of amazing things that you need to watch the film for. But one of the things that this film did incredibly well is that they had an impact campaign that went alongside the film. So that concentrated on showing the film to the right audience. So not just to the global audience, but actually like in those fishing communities and having, you know, open forums for them to discuss the problems, going into, you know, high-end officials in the government and actually showing them the film, which had some quite compromising footage of government officials and some of the things going on. So it kind of forced their hand as well. So they did a fantastic job, and they're kind of really changing the game for a lot of these big films that do tackle environmental issues, because we can't just talk about them anymore. We have to do something. So that's great to see that that's happening.
Can conservation storytelling and potentially also in fiction kind of bring that across, kind of help with the science communication of conservation work?
In terms of storytelling, for sure. I think one of the things that we're seeing more of, and I think we need to see even more of, is that multi-perspective approach, because just hearing about like what the researchers say is incredibly valuable and is fundamental for the conservation of a species, say, but actually understanding the barriers for protecting that species for a local community is really important. You need to understand those barriers, because there will be a way of working with those communities, but if we don't even hear their perspective, then how can we even begin to make progress, right? And the same with the government. Governments obviously can do amazing things, but they also have so many things to juggle. Yeah. So I think Sea of Shadows, for example, is a fantastic documentary that really does that. And I think as well, as the world, or the filmmaking industry, especially in the West, is starting to realize how important these global voices are, I think they're trying, you know, obviously people are moving in a way to get more of those voices in. And I think we'll all understand things better then.
I actually only have one question left for you, and that is to ask you whether you've read any fiction that you want to recommend.
One of the books I did read recently, which is a classic, is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which actually was really, really interesting, because obviously there is factual content within here, but obviously it's a fictional book, right? Because it's from like, I think it's the 1700s, and then they're in a submarine that, you know, is under the sea. I won't go tell you too much about it because I don't want to spoil it, but it is an amazing book. And while the relationship, the people involved, the relationship they have with the sea is kind of quite exploitative, in the sense that they tend to be like battling a lot of sea creatures, which I'm not so keen on. But the way they describe the ocean is very different to how you would describe it now. They still talk about animals that we have now, but they talk about it in the sense that there is so much more. And another book that, when I was trying to think about ecofiction, that I read recently was The Galapagos by Kurt Vonnegut. I don't know if you've ever read this.
No.
But it is a really bizarre book. So it's actually it talks about the merit of the human brain from the evolutionary perspective. So basically, some disaster happens, and this group of people get stranded on one of the islands of the Galapagos. And while they are there, the rest of humankind becomes infertile and basically disappears off the face of the earth. Ooh. So they become the only survivors of the race, right? And then it talks about basically where they evolved to over this time. If we all disappeared and then we carried on, what version of us would survive, right? And obviously it does, the hints of that is that it kind of is a nod to Charles Darwin, right? Who obviously spent a lot of time in the Galapagos, and obviously with his
talking about
natural selection, and evolution. So yeah, so it is an interesting one.
All right, well that about wraps us up, Sally. So I will be asking you for all of the links of the different things that you mentioned, and I will be leaving them all in the description below so everybody can find them. I will be leaving the link to Lamave website as well in the description below, and if anybody has any questions for Sally, then you can let me know and I will pass them along, and hopefully Sally will get back to me and I will feed all the answers back to you. But I guess all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview and agreeing to be on the channel. I really enjoyed talking to you about this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been great.
So that's all for today, and I will see you next week, Ecofictologists.